Hello, everyone. No introduction needed. I'm SUPR. And in episode 4 of the Never Ending Siege series, I'm going to be discussing in-game leading. And more specifically, the basics that I believe lead to becoming a good in-game leader. Now, when I say that, that doesn't necessarily mean that every single in-game leader in Rainbow Six Siege follows these exact things that I'm going to show and explain to you. Every team functions differently. Every team operates under a different system. Every in-game leader has their own beliefs or their own strengths and weaknesses. So for me, I'm just offering my own opinions on what a successful in-game leader needs to possess in order to thrive in Rainbow Six Siege. So for those who are not aware, an IGL is essentially the player on a team who calls out rotations, strategies, how teammates should position themselves, adaptations, when specific parts of the map should be pushed, and more. Basically, the IGL tries to take the burden off of the rest of his team and do the thinking for them so that his teammates are able to focus on their jobs and fragging out. Obviously, some IGLs play fragging roles, and that operates a little bit differently. For myself, I play a hard support role from the IGL position. And also, when you read all of these things, rotation, strategies, how teammates should position themselves, etc., be aware that this doesn't mean this responsibility is always strictly on the IGL. Players on the team can see things that the IGL will not be able to see. And if they're able to identify a play that could be made, something that could be done, then they're able to call that. That would kind of be a shot call. That doesn't mean that this player is a shot caller, but within a system, especially because you have 5 different players doing 5 different things, sometimes there will be things that the IGL is not able to know. So while this is the primary job of the IGL to do these things, the responsibility isn't always solely on this person. So why is an IGL important? Obviously, in the case of a lot of IGLs, this player is not helping as much as others in the fragging department. So these are some of the things that I think an IGL helps with. First off is structure. Without an IGL, teams are more likely to just play pickup game styles, which means there's going to be less consistency in strategy, and you're focusing on gunfights. If you don't have strategy, if you don't have structure towards what you play, you're not going to be consistent. Much of what you do is going to rely off of individual plays, winning a gunfight, coming from behind in bad positions, and basically you're just strictly playing to frag out. This is not a level and pro league where you can really play without some sort of structure. Some teams obviously play looser than others, but they're still playing within a loose system if they are on the more aggressive side. The next is pressure. I believe that an IGL should assume all of the responsibility for losing. Obviously, if the team wins, all of the players on the team receive the credit. The IGL maybe gets some credit, but most of the time that player is not fragging out. So the accolades, the recognition goes to their teammates. But when they lose, then it comes into a situation where all of the blame is on the IGL, because maybe the IGL in this instance is not having success frag-wise. Maybe they're losing rounds, calls aren't working out. So really, an IGL is kind of a thankless job. You won't get much credit for winning usually, but you'll take a lot of the blame when you do lose. This is also the person who obviously, is trying to think for the players inside of the game, which is going to relieve some of the pressure that they have. If a player has to constantly worry about all sorts of situations, what to do here, what to do there, etc., that's a lot of sensory overload that could potentially add to the pressure of just playing in a match. In a way, the IGL tries to take the burden off of everyone else's shoulders and put it on themselves. The next trait that I believe to be important is leadership. Obviously, it's in the name, in-game leader, but the IGL is often the captain and the leader of the team. This is a person who generally is responsible for the other players on their team and the philosophy that the team plays. If the team doesn't have strong leadership, the team likely won't succeed. If you have a lazy leader, the team might be lazy. If you have somebody who is not able to direct people and teach people, then you probably won't progress. Leadership comes in many ways, but I think at least first acknowledging that you are a leader and you have a responsibility to your team to be a leader is the first part of this. And lastly, dedication. I think for most IGLs, they probably overall put the most time into the game. Although they may be not playing the game the most, they're often going to be the person watching the most VODs, working on strategy the most, working on theory, and basically doing a lot more stuff outside of the game that still revolves around the game. I call this the dirty work. This is the part that's not necessarily fun for most people, but this is the part that is going to help an IGL be better prepared. For instance, I basically watch every single VOD of every single match in every region of any top 4 to 6 team in any of the major regions. And if it's any teams that go to majors, if it's going to invitational, I've watched every single VOD that they've played. Because you never know when you'll see something interesting. You'll never know when you see a strategy that you think that you could use or you could make better. You never know when you see a take, execute, something like that. You can always take inspiration from other teams. And if you just want to copy and paste it, you could try that. If you want to, change it up a little bit so that it better fits your team. Being able to identify, being able to watch, being able to come up with all of these kind of ideas is important for an in-game leader. You basically need to be an encyclopedia of Rainbow Six knowledge. So, these are the things that I think are important for a leader, for the leadership idea. First is confidence. If your in-game leader is not confident, or doesn't seem confident, or isn't confident in your team, or themselves, then the rest of the team isn't going to be confident. The team looks to the leader for confidence. Whether you're losing, whether you're winning, whether you're 10-0 or 0-10, you should always show the same confidence. If you show confidence, the team will trust in you, trust in your calls, trust in your ideals, and trust in the way that you want to play the game. I myself am not a player who gets many kills, but from the way that I talk, from the way that I act, you would think that I'm the best player to ever touch the game. Do I think I'm the best player to ever touch the game? Well, absolutely. I'm a god. No, I don't. But I think I'm pretty good. But even if I didn't think I was good, and even if I did think my team sucked, you would never know because I would always act as if we didn't. So it's important to always show confidence and not waver in that confidence. If you don't seem confident when you're making a call, your team's not going to feel as confident following that call. If you don't seem as confident heading into a game, your team is not going to seem as confident heading into a game. They expect you to be confident And if you don't show that confidence, then their confidence will waver. The second I put is de-escalate, not escalate. In my opinion, the leader of a team should be working to resolve arguments if they do occur, not escalate them and continue arguing. Obviously, especially over the course of a year, especially over the course of, X amount of practices, there will be arguments, maybe between teammates, maybe even between yourself and somebody on your team. The important part about this, though, is to always try to settle the argument in a manner that is respectful to each other. And if you feel like you maybe, got a little too worked up, you apologize. You say, I'm sorry, I, had a bad day. I just, that was stress. The situation was stressing me out. I apologize if I, raised my voice or it's, something in that manner. And your teammate will respect you for acknowledging that you were a little bit, overboard and move on. But if you keep escalating situations and arguments or keep letting your teammates escalate arguments, it will create a toxic environment. And it might cause resentment between players on the team. You wouldn't want arguments going on in your workplace. You have to treat your team like a workplace. Keep everyone on the same page and make sure everyone is working together. Vibes are a very underrated part of teams. A team with good vibes, a team that's having fun, a team that gets along, more often than not is going to play better than the team that is, just showing up because they have to. And then they don't ever speak to anybody on the team outside of when they're in a round. And maybe they just resent being on the team in general. Third, I put manage emotions. As the leader of the team, especially as an endgame leader, it's important to separate your emotions round to round, game to game. You don't want to get too high off of a big clutch, and you don't want to get too low off of maybe a thrown round. And you don't want to allow the players on your team to also get too high or get too low based off of what's going on in the game. Obviously, I've already kind of talked about how I think as an IGL, you should try to take on as much pressure as you can to help the rest of the team not feel that pressure. But obviously, everybody is different. Some players are going to feel pressured in some situations. I believe it's your responsibility as the leader of the team, as the IGL, to try to manage these emotions in the best way that you can, motivate the people on your team, and try to channel these emotions into a positive manner. It's also important to not get too excited, to not get too mad, to not get too low, especially in a game. Arguments, by the way, should never happen in a game. And all of these things are essentially practice because games are completely different. You should never be arguing in a game. If there is something that occurs, you can always talk about it after. The same really goes for practice. But especially in a match, you do not want your team riding up and down off of emotions. If you try to remain more evenly, motivated to feel the same throughout the match, you're less likely to have a fall off or a rise in how you're feeling. And then finally, I put take responsibility. Kind of touched on this already, but I do believe it's on the leader of the team or the IGL to let everybody else on your team have the glory and to take responsibility for all the losses, all the mistakes. Obviously, as an in-game leader, you will not make the correct call the majority of the time. Not the majority, sorry, but a lot of the time. You will not have the best stats a lot of the time. And when you're winning, nobody cares about your stats. Nobody cares about calls that went wrong. When you're losing, that's when all the blame is going to come on you. And to help your teammates, you take that and you carry that with you. But it's important to not let that affect you. Sometimes it can get a little much, especially if your team is in a little bit of a downward swing. But it's on you to kind of bear the responsibility for your team and make their lives easier. Next is practice. In practice, I think you obviously approach it differently than to how a game would go. But first, you want to establish your style, especially if you're a newer IGL to a team. Are you a team that wants to play very structured? Are you a team that wants to play loose? Are you a team that wants to kind of go back and forth? How do you want to play, and how do you want to establish this system within your team? It's important to also identify the players on your team, and this is where I say know your players, and try to establish the style around what suits them. If you know your players and know how they play and know what they're comfortable with, it will relieve the pressure off of them, and it'll make them feel more comfortable playing the game. It can get to a point as well through practice where you can essentially predict and know what all of your teammates will do in situations because you know them so well on the roles they're playing. It's important to put your teammates in comfortable positions because they'll be more confident. They won't question what they're doing. And they'll understand their job. And then you, as the endgame leader, know that this player prefers this on this map, etc., etc. It adds comfort all around. Next, you want to build chemistry in practice. Obviously, this is for the entire team, but it could be between anyone. You have a couple of people who usually are roaming. Let them build chemistry on the roam. You have a couple of people who are usually playing site. Let them build chemistry in site. Are you working on a new execute? Are you working on a new strategy? Practice and build the chemistry with rotations and understanding where your team may be. Essentially, with enough practice, you'll know where your teammates are and things that they might be doing without them even really speaking. Obviously, you want them to speak, but you can get to that point where the chemistry is just so good that much of the round can go unspoken, and then it gives you the ability to focus more on the game. Because if people are constantly talking, if things are constantly happening or worrying about, then that could be a little bit of sensory overload. And have fun in practice. Nobody wants to come to practice to feel miserable for 6-8 hours a day. That's how people get burnt out. It's important to have fun. Obviously, you're practicing for a purpose. You're practicing to get better, but you're practicing with the idea that it's not life or death. You can have fun in practice, and guess what? Winning is fun. Next, I want to talk about correcting mistakes, and I think this is a very important topic. In scrims, because you should never do this in a match, but in scrims, if somebody messes up a strategy, if somebody is kind of trolling, if somebody makes mistakes or, whatever issues may be, you should never be Captain Hindsight. There's no point in saying you should have done this, we could have done this, why didn't you do this? Right? Because it can't be changed. Especially in the middle of a map. Hindsight doesn't help anybody. If you've noticed something that a teammate could have done differently, especially as an in-game leader, Then the next time you're attacking that site or whatever it may be, you can tell that player, hey, we'll do this instead of this time, and I think it'll have a better chance. And this kind of goes back to also not arguing or starting arguments in a map. Any discussions really that you want to have about rounds, about things that happen within a scrim per map, should be tabled for either between the maps or after the scrim. You don't want to start a big discussion in the middle of your scrim, have people distracted or potentially tilt somebody, and then the rest of your day is basically chalked and you're not going to get much production out of that. So it's important to have healthy conversations about mistakes being made, but in a respectful manner and at the right time, not in the middle of a round, not in the middle of a game, not being hindsight about it. The next I'll say is how to approach a match. Obviously, if you're playing in a best of one series like, in the NAL, we can kind of narrow down the maps that we're going to be playing for that week. Obviously, for everyone, league structures are different, etc. But in reality, what you want to focus on is, one, understanding what they probably will ban or what's the likelihood that they'll ban things. So you can try to either practice without that or maybe ban it so that you don't get used to playing with that. And then you narrow down the map pool to what you know what you're going to ban going into this, and you might maybe have an idea of what they'll ban, especially if you're a team who's very elite on certain maps. A lot of times team won't play you on those maps. So then you maybe focus on practicing 3 or 4 maps for that week rather than practicing every single map. You just keep getting repetitions on the maps that are more likely to be played. And it'll make you feel more prepared going into a match. And then, as I said here, you want to try to be your own biggest critic. As the endgame leader, it's your responsibility really to watch back VODs of your own team, of your own practice, of your own plays, and think of ways that you could have done something better. Even if you won a game, even if you won a round, even if you won a scrim, there are always situations where you could have made a better call. You could have played something different. Don't be satisfied just because you won. Maybe you won a couple clutches and you won the game. Look back and try to understand what you did wrong and how you can correct that going forward. You should always be your own biggest critic, because the job of an IGL is to constantly adapt to metas, to constantly understand different ways that you can win. And this is a personal belief. I know a lot of teams don't actually follow this, but I believe in practice, you should be practicing your defaults and not adapting. In a game, the Sonics are probably one of the more adaptable teams, but in a practice, I don't believe in adapting. I believe you have defaults. These are your set, calls that your team is going to do. And it's important to make sure that these are as close to perfect as can be, because if you don't need to adapt, it's easier, really, because those are things you've practiced. And then if you do adapt, then every situation in terms of adapting will always be different in a game anyway. For instance, in NA, we scrim a lot of the same teams, and some of the stuff that will work the first scrim won't work the third scrim because they know what we're going to do, because all we're doing are defaults. But on my side of it, I also know what they're going to do because we scrim them so much as well. However, I will never just go into a scrim and say we're going to do this, this, and this because we know they're going to do this, this, and this. We're going to practice our defaults, because if you know what we're going to do and we can still beat you with our defaults, then imagine how bad we'll beat you when we actually adapt to what you're doing. I think that's important because you can also use this as a way in a scrim to, honestly, it makes your scrim partners better than they really are, because they'll play better when they know what you're going to do. And if you want, the first time you see something, you just run your default. Then the second time, if they run the same thing, then I would say it's okay if you want to try something else because now they've shown it. But I wouldn't just head into a scrim and be like, well, these guys did this and last scrim, so we're just going to do this. That doesn't help anyone. If anything, they're cheating themselves by kind of just playing what you did last time, and it's not impressing us, and it's not helping you. So what's the point of doing that? You should approach every scrim as if you've never played that team. Obviously, if it's in a match, you should always be looking for ways to adapt or change if something's not working. But even still, that doesn't necessarily mean that your default wouldn't work. You should probably try that first. So now when we go to a game, a very important thing for me is not micromanaging. I've seen a lot of people think that an IGL's job is to literally tell every single person what to do in every situation, tell them what to do here, you go here, you do this, then this, then this. That's not micromanaging. And if anything, it will make your players scared to trust their instincts, their game sense. It will make them feel like they can't do anything without you. And it will make them uncomfortable if you're telling them to do stuff that maybe they don't think they can do. Instead, you direct players to their general positions that you need them in and let them decide how they want to deal with this position. Obviously, everybody on your team with practice is aware of the goal, is aware of the take. And, you know, if you're calling an adaptation, obviously you tell this player, hey, can you come here and then do this? But you shouldn't be instructing them all the way through it. You have to let people play the game and make decisions on their own. In the end, they'll be more comfortable, they'll be able to make more plays, and they'll feel more confident, whether you're alive or dead, if you're not instructing them on every little thing that they should be doing. Next, it's important to set players up. I especially think this is important. If you notice one of the players on your team is maybe struggling a little bit in a game, look for an opportunity to set them up for a play. You know, maybe somebody on our team has started out slow and be like, hey, I'm going to drone you in here and, you know, there's going to be a guy here. Let's try to get you this kill. Let's get this opening. Hey, I'm going to flash you in here. I want you to push this. You can get a free grenade kill, or this guy will be flashed. You could get killed. You should always be thinking about your teammates before yourself. Try to set them up for plays. Try to look for ways to help them. Basically, the team is going to win because of the other 4 players, and you are just there to help enable them do their job to the best of their ability. Next is communication. Communication, as always, is key. Not only from the endgame leader, communicating effectively what you want to do, having a clear idea, especially in an adaptation, of how you want people to be positioned or what the end goal here is, what you're trying to do, but from your teammates as well. Because if you think of it, you have 5 players on a team. The endgame leader can see what he is droning or what he sees himself, and maybe other drones, but he cannot see what the other 4 players on the team are seeing. It is essential for the other 4 players on the team to be able to communicate effectively what they're seeing, utility that's important, players, so that the in-game leader has a better idea of understanding the setup and the position of people, and he can call adaptation, he could say sites free, whatever it may be. If you think of it in that way, this is a 5-part puzzle. The in-game leader is one piece. Cannot put the puzzle together to the round without the help of the other 4 players. You have to be able to communicate effectively to help give the in-game leader the other puzzle pieces he needs to operate and call effectively. Next, it's very important for an in-game leader over the course of a game to identify patterns. A lot of people, a lot of players, a lot of setups are predictable. You kind of have to have a memory bank where you store information throughout a game so you know, hey, this person's here at the beginning of the round. Hey, they don't reinforce this wall. Hey, they don't cover this. Hey, this should be free. Hey, they don't play up top, so we can go top down vertical rather than our normal take. Hey, this guy's going to start here and then rotate to this point. Identify patterns and change what you're doing throughout the game based off the patterns, whether it's the operator lineup the other team's running, whether it's where they play. Every team has patterns within a game, and you can always change things to take advantage of this. Oftentimes, it'll catch them off guard because you didn't do this the first time. Now you're reacting to what you saw them do the round before, and they won't expect it. Paying close attention to everything that your opponent does gives you the best chance to win the game. It also makes you less predictable. The more predictable you are, the easier you are to play against. Don't be predictable. Look for ways to make plays. And now we have mid-round calling. This is essentially what you would say is halfway through the round, or maybe to a stage where everybody has got to their initial positions. At this point, it's important to identify, hey, what's the man count? Can we just complete our take here? Do we have a 5v3 and play for trade out? Hey, could we not take this so now we don't have the control we need? Can we look to go elsewhere? Mid-round calling is always going to be based off of what your team has taken on the map, what the man count is, what kind of utility you have, and where the opponent is. This is why one of the reasons I don't like adapting in scrims, because this situation will never be the same no matter what. Every round plays out differently. The calls that you're giving every single time will be different than the calls before. You just have to be able to understand what's free, what's not. What has your team taken control of? What have they not taken control of? Are you man down? Are you man up? Is it even? Where is your opponent? What is the most essential way to get to site and force and execute? How do you put the pressure on them? This is something that will come with experience. It won't come naturally. You just have to play a lot and be in these situations a lot to understand what you need to do. Eventually, you'll be so comfortable that it'll come naturally to you about what you should be doing. You know, like we said before, the patterns that you've identified, knowing your players so well that you know what they'll do in these situations. That's how you become a better in-game leader and better at making mid-round calls. Be the hype man. You know, I said before, it's important to manage emotions. You don't want the players on your team getting too hype or too down, especially in a match. So you're the guy who says, if somebody makes a crazy play, you say, let's go. You know, you hype them up. You try to get in the heads of the other team. But you're doing that because you know that you can reset emotionally round to round. You can go crazy. You can get up and start screaming, hype your teammate up, and then you sit back down and you're like a robot, like it never even happened the next round. But now your teammate, he's going to feel real good. He's going to feel confident because he's hyped up. Be the hype man for your team, and that's kind of being the leader as well. Motivate them, pump them up so they're feeling as confident as they can be, and then reset. And that's what I say here with moving on. Move on, round to round. Win, lose, doesn't matter. If something worked one round, that doesn't mean it's going to work again. Move on from that call. Don't be stuck on a call. Don't be afraid to adapt. Don't be afraid to change the things that you're trying to do. Every map, especially if you're in a best of 3, doesn't matter if you win the first map, you could lose the next 2. Doesn't matter if you lose the first map, you could win the next 2. Doesn't matter if you're down 6-3, you could win the next 5. Move on, round to round. If you let yourself get down, if you let yourself get up, you're not focusing on the situation at hand. You're living in the past. Look forward, move on, round to round. Don't let the results of the match impact how you're feeling going forward. And change the pace. And this is kind of what adapting is. This is what identifying patterns is. This is what mid-round calling is. Don't always be slow. Don't always be fast. Don't always be predictable. If you're changing the pace, maybe one round you're super slow, they're going to say, okay, these guys are going to execute the last 30 seconds, and then you're hitting sight at 130, they're not going to be ready. You'll catch them off guard. If you keep changing the pace, if you keep changing the way you're trying to do things, you will catch your opponent off guard, and they will feel uneasy. They will feel uncomfortable in how to deal with what you're doing, and it'll give them a sense of panic because they won't really understand what you're doing. Even if you're doing the same things, what if you just did it faster? Say you do a take and, you do this and do that, and you execute on site at 30 seconds. Then the next time they go to the site, you pretty much know their setup because you've already seen it, so you can kind of shortcut some things if you need to. And instead of executing at 30 seconds, now you're executing at 1:15. It puts the pressure on your opponent to react. Put the pressure on your opponent. Don't put the pressure on yourself. It's always been my opinion that being faster is being better. Because even if you're not fast, or even if you're not in the absolute perfect positions when you're going fast, you'll likely catch people off guard. They'll be out of position too. Some teams have this idea that there's a way to play perfect siege. You can always be in the perfect position. You can always have the perfect execute. You can always have the perfect clear. There's no such thing as perfect siege. The only way to play perfect siege is to win the game 7-0. To win every map 7-0. Nobody's doing that. So nobody plays perfect. Whatever it takes to win is the best way to play siege. Whatever you identify as the best way to win, that is the way to play siege. There's no perfect way. But you, as the in-game leader, build the way towards that success. Help your teammates pave the way towards that success. So I hope this was insightful. I'm sure there are a few things I left out. These are mainly what I think are basics. There's obviously a lot more that goes into it, but I think as a beginner, as somebody who's just trying to learn IGL, this can be helpful to you to at least understand and look for things that you need to work on, that your team should work on, things to focus on, how to handle situations, and maybe you can become the next great IGL for whatever region you're in. As always, thank you for listening or watching. I'll be back for more. Give me some ideas in the comments. See you later.